Welcome to the world of LearnX. We're stepping inside best practice today, and I am joined by Jack. And I'm really scared of getting your surname wrong, Jack, even though we've met a couple of times. Jack Peploe. Am I saying that? I'm saying that right.
You nailed it.
Incredible. Jack Peploe. Jack, you are the veterinary IT guy. So tell us where that all started.
Oh, wow. Okay. I suppose I've always been in technology. I set up my first business when I was 16 years old. I think it was merely out of pure frustration at school. I realized that sort of maybe initially my grades weren't going to get me where I wanted to be. I could never seem to perform when it came to the exams. And so I needed something to sort of keep me busy because I was very much a practical person. And I suppose I realized the opportunities of technology, how powerful it was, even at that very young age. And it wasn't even that I was particularly passionate about technology. It was just the fact that I realized that it could open lots of doors. And so kind of I initially set up this first business. It was actually building computers. That was where I started, and sort of was headhunted, which was great, to go and look after a number of different businesses around their technology. And bearing in mind, this all fed from my dad getting a weather machine. Can you believe it? Because he was a farmer.
Machine.
A
What?
weather machine, and I was fascinated by it. But that kind of got me into the interest of technology, and got into the world of veterinary. And it was actually because of a partner of a local veterinary group that happened to visit our farm and look after the cows. And he realized I was in technology and asked me about, would you mind looking at this computer for me? Fixed it for him, and lo and behold, got introduced to the practice. It took about 3 years to win them over, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that later. But that relationship with technology, but they're still a client today. But yeah, that was sort of where it all started, and that's how I got into the sort of the veterinary IT side. And I also brought in my hat of being a certified ethical hacker as well, which always sends the fear of God into people. But it's a good hat to have.
We'll have to talk about that because that sounds a bit controversial. We'll come back to that later in the interview. So for anyone who's tuned in today, anyone watching or listening, what kind of things are going to be helpful for them over the next 30 or so minutes as we talk? What kind of things are we going to unpack that might give them some insights in terms of how they can maybe get out of a tech tangle and use technology to help them rather than it feel like it's against them?
Yeah, I think it's really purely around the awareness of what the technology can do. It's trying to sort of reframe that relationship more than anything. I mean, sort of as I mentioned at the start, it's about if you can change that relationship with technology and understand that it's actually not an enemy, it's not something that's meant to be a blocker or get in your way. It's actually there to sort of enable you, but it is making sure that you're going to be doing that necessary preparatory work in advance to be ready for that transition to whatever it might be, or at least having an awareness of what it is that you've currently got in place so that you make sure that you get the most from it. So I would say the big thing is the reframing that attitude towards the technology itself.
So I've been working in the veterinary industry for a relatively short time. We were actually introduced into the sector in 2024 through a friend who's a partner at Hazelwoods, and he saw what we were doing with small business transformation and said, "Andy, could you help some of our clients?" And I said, let's give it a go. And we've really loved it. But I'm going to be honest, Jack, it does feel a little bit like we've got into a DeLorean and we've gone back to 1985 or maybe 1995. Some of the technology being used inside veterinary practices, it seems so far behind what's coming out on the market. What are your thoughts? Obviously, you're an expert here in this field. What are your thoughts on my frustration around how dated things kind of feel in some
Yeah,
places?
no, I think you've nailed it, Andy. I always worry about when I say this because I'm worried someone's going to hunt me down afterwards. But I had the same feeling. So yes, I've been in the space for 21 and a bit years now, but not completely dedicated in veterinary. It was actually during COVID that we decided to make that transition to hop into the veterinary space, because for me, you can't make a difference to a business if you don't truly understand them. And I genuinely believe that if you're going to understand someone, you need to really focus on one thing. I don't think you can do multiple things. I'm terrible at it. And when I hopped into the space and really looked into it, sort of started to unpick things, for me, it felt like we were sort of 10 years behind. And what was scary is that in most cases, the UK was the most advanced within the space, which blew my mind. But I very much shared the same view as you, thinking, right, we're in the dark ages a little bit. Everything is disconnected. Nothing's working together. Remember the time, it's sort of 20 years ago, I think 20 plus years ago now, Salesforce had this lock-in concept. And that's where we were. It was the fact that, there was no way of getting this data that belonged to the practice out, which blew my mind. There was no way of integrating. There was no way of connecting things up to sort of try to enhance the solutions and make the whole experience for the practice better. For me, unfortunately, and like the PMS vendors know this, and I always go after them. And I'm not trying to be negative about them. I think they're doing really good things now. We're going in the right direction, which is great. But originally, it did start with the practice management system, and that was because the practice management system is like the heart of the business, and it shouldn't be. I appreciate it is a core technology and everything runs from it, but it absolutely should not be the core technology. And so everyone focused on this, but the issue we had was there was just no drive or hunger to change. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got veterinary professionals, clinicians ultimately, who are passionate about their patients ultimately. They're not passionate around the technology. But because things weren't striving, because things weren't changing, and if they were changing, it was a really expensive cost per year to change out a server, which was completely unnecessary. And I remember there was one practice, one of the first practices I took on. The way they connected to their email was that they had to VPN out of the building to connect back into the building to a box that was right next to each other to go and send an email from one computer. And that was all because of the fear of viruses, but it was just through really poor advice. And I think kind of for us, what we noticed also was there was a lack of transparency and impartiality within the space. And because that teamed with the fear of technology, the lack of education of what it can do, and also the fact that there were all these single points of failure, like there are still practices that have got boxes whirring in the background, that black box that hides in the background. And so I suppose this is kind of where it all cemented from. And it was the fact that we needed to break away from that initially to be able to take this industry forward, because otherwise it doesn't matter how nice the people are, it doesn't matter how passionate they are. If there are constraints like the technology, the industry was never going to drive forward. So that was my personal view on it.
I did have a quick chat with a lady, and it was a quick chat for obvious reasons because I didn't think I could help her, who she owns a practice and said at the London Vet Show, he said, yeah, well, I don't use computers. We don't really need computers in our surgery. I'm like, that's amazing. I'm genuinely kind of impressed they've managed to do that. But obviously that's not the future. That's not where things are going. In terms of practice management systems, obviously you put together it's an encyclopedia, Jack. I don't know how you do it really. You put together the state of the PMS. So you look each year at all of the practice management systems on the market and you actually review them. So what inspired you, other than a slight hint of insanity, to actually take on that project?
So I think it was my drive and my hunger, right? I do things because I want to make a difference. One of my downsides is I'm not commercially focused, and that does beat me up sometimes. I do things because I generally want to. And for me, when I saw the blockers that were in place within this industry, and I think that team with the fact of how passionate and lovely these people were. I think it was the people that really did it for me. They were genuine, nice, really want to do things because they really value the patient. They do it because of the patient, and that's all. They forget about everything else. They're completely driven by the patient. And when I saw this sort of, maybe it's too strong to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, this exploitation of the fact that these vendors were just very much stuck in the mud. There was no change and there was no willingness to change. For me, it kind of felt like a bit of an opportunity to go, well, you know what? The only way that we're going to be able to make this industry move forward is to increase awareness, because what became very apparent was that the typical process of selecting a practice management system normally involves something along these lines. For those that are watching this, it was, I'm going to do this and I'm going to point over there. And that is the solution that we're going to go with. And I'm not kidding. That is generally what I did see happen. Or it would be that they would go down to their next door neighbor practice and say, hey guys, what practice management system do you use? And they would literally go forward with a decision based on that one factor with absolutely no due diligence. It wasn't just the independents as well. This was also corporate groups where I did see this happen too, which again sort of blew my mind. So for me, it was, look, all I'd like to do is, I'm not trying to go and upset people, but I'd like to try and move this industry forward. I appreciate I can't do it on my own. And that's where our original concept came out with this idea of creating this buyer's guide. It's a which buyer's guide would be the best way of looking at it. It's not going to answer all your questions, but what I want to do is I want to be able to give you a succinct view on, and it's one person's view. I have to accept that. Like, we do go out to quite a few different practices across the UK to get an understanding of what are the typical features and functions they would expect from a practice management system. That helps form part of our scoring solution for the PMS report. But the whole point of it was to allow them to have a better understanding of what they need to be looking for and what is out there. So it's educating them, in a basic way, because I also appreciate that vets lack time, or people within the veterinary industry lack time, and so it's trying to present them the key bits of information that they could have to be able to make a better informed choice, or at least shortlisting of potential solutions. Because choosing a practice management system is huge. At the end of the day, if you get it wrong, it can be incredibly painful, and it's also incredibly painful making that move. And if you need to move away, and I have seen that happen. I've seen practices. In fact, one of the clients that sort of came to us, they approached us originally by accident, and they were moving across the practice management system, and it was that sudden realization of, actually, we've made the wrong choice, and we're going to have to move again. And as you can imagine, that's huge disruption to their practice and their ways of working.
So I'm just going to throw something out there, Jack, and you're going to set me straight on this, but it kind of feels a bit like, looking at practice management systems, it kind of feels like a CRM, customer relationship management system of sorts, with the word vet on, and then the price is kind of multiplied by 5 or 10 or 20 times. Is it not possible for a practice to pick something up that's aimed at kind of more wider businesses, that's something available, and then they can kind of put something together that, kind of makes the nuance work for them? Is that not something that practices can do?
It is possible. It's just a lot of hard work. And actually, I will sort of, if you don't mind, correct you slightly, because I feel like
it was meant to be a bad question, Jack. It was meant to.
No, but 100%. Like with regards to the pricing aspect, like normally what happens is when you go and say that you specialize on something particular, so slapping, like you say, the veterinary term on, it usually means that the price is sort of quadrupled, or even more. And that's the really interesting thing within this marketplace, is it's not the case. If you were to go and get a ERP solution, so enterprise resource planning solution, or like an enhanced CRM, it's basically it's like a practice management system, but for general marketplace. And if you were to go and get a solution like that, so something like Microsoft Dynamics 365 or Salesforce or HubSpot even, if you look at what the per user price on these platforms are, they're high. They're hideously high. And there's a reason for that, because they make sure that their solutions are completely flexible and can be integrated within reason with anything. And the really interesting thing with practice management systems is that they've kind of gone a different route. They charge a very high figure for integrating their solution in the first place. And then they charge what I would regard as a very, very low fee for actually utilizing their platform, which seems a bit backwards. And further to that, they then go and charge most, and this is not all, so take this with a pinch of salt, but they charge vendors that they integrate with. So, for example, phone systems or things like client interaction tools such as Digital Practice or PetsApp, or even things like VidiVet. They charge these vendors like almost a percentage of their revenue for integrating into their solution, which is mind blowing. That's not the point, right? I understand you might want to take that concept if you're having to develop something bespoke for that third party vendor. But if they're enhancing your solution, why would you do that? It's against all logic of how SaaS solutions are ultimately constructed, right? And so it does come to that point, right, where you are correct. Yes, you could go and take an off-the-shelf CRM solution and start plugging it in, because a lot of which the practice management system does is relatively straightforward. Where it starts to get a bit more complicated is more of the veterinary specific elements, such as, things like the insurance integrations, which, okay, they're not done amazingly well at the moment, especially with what's going on, but there are some interesting things in the pipeline, so that's great. But more of the bespoke solutions to the veterinary industry, such as, things like labs integration. So diagnostics is a big one, because you're not really going to get sort of an off-the-shelf integration into, a standard CRM for that sort of thing. Not normally. It's not to say it's impossible, but it's going to require probably a lot more work than getting a standard practice management system, say, that's off the shelf. So I think it's kind of, there are pros and cons with both. I don't see many that have gone down the bespoke route in the sense of getting off the shelf. I've seen more, ironically, take the route of trying to build their own, which is utterly nuts. Bad idea. Anyone that's contemplating that, please stop.
Even with
We already
AI
have, I
though,
think,
even
yeah,
with
even with
AI,
AI at the
with
moment, because the problem is that we've got, 146 solutions in this marketplace. It's too many. If we keep developing solutions at the moment, you're taking away from what it is that your core of your business is, right? It's all about patient experience. That is the most fundamental aspect. Like, for us, or for this industry, what I've identified is it's all about proactivity. It's all about trying to provide better healthcare to the animals. That's their driver. Their driver is not to become a technology company. And I think, like, it does require a huge amount of effort. And I know, like, AI is amazing. And I mean, we use a huge amount. I know you use a huge amount. You can build out solutions incredibly quickly. But my attitude to that would be, why not, if you want to do something like that, get something off the shelf, that sort of out of the box, that does the core of what it is that you need. And realistically, fundamentally, what a practice management system needs to do is it needs a form of schedule management. Okay, so managing on who's where in what consult with what client and animal. You need some form of basic stock control. That's important because they do handle quite a bit of stock within the actual practice itself. You need the diagnostics component, because obviously that is very bespoke to the industry. And then you need some basic form of payment acceptance. Everything else within reason, and I know there are some other elements that you might want to consider, but everything else should be bolted in. And I think it comes down to this concept of what Web3 is trying to build, where data ownership is changing. And this is something which I've been banging on about for a while, but we're still very much in that infancy stage of taking on the concept of APIs and integrations. We're getting there slowly, but we are still in that infancy stage. But really what it means is we're going to get to that ultimate situation of creating this mobile health record. And maybe this will change things. Maybe that will mean that we don't need this cumbersome central system. And actually, the data ownership is on the client. It's their data. And wherever they go, it can be linked to, for example, a microchip. So animal comes in, it's a universal record. They scan that, and that contains all the relevant information that a practice needs. And they can import that into their own solution that has those core features or functions to allow their practice to work. And then what you could do, if you are interested in technology, which there aren't a huge amount, but it is kind of changing, that's where you could start to, do things like vibe coding, or, utilizing AI to build out basic functions rather than trying to build this enormous, gigantic solution, which, I mean, I dare you to go and speak to multiple people and ask them for a definition of what a practice management system is. In fact, I take that even further and I say, go up to a PMS vendor and ask them what a practice management system is, and you will get a different definition every single time.
I think you make some really good points there, Jack. I would encourage people to look at solving narrow problems with creative new solutions, vibe coding. You know, we just built a really cool tool this week on Replit. So we've got a non-coder, someone who's not trained as a web developer, who doesn't write lines of code, who's come up with an idea and executed something really good. But like you say, it's not the kind of core of the business. You know, there's not a perfect solution anywhere with technology. You know, I if I could change Microsoft, I would. You know, if I could change how Google works, I would. You know, nothing is perfect. But let's take a step back. I've kept up with most of the acronyms here. We've got PMSs, VPNs, APIs, lots of new
Sorry.
terminology. No, it's all good. It's all good. But let's take a step back. Digital skills within veterinary teams. I would suggest from my time working on site with teams, there's a real need for upskilling and an attitude of continual improvement that's needed when it comes to digital skills. Because I do speak to a lot of vets, and I even speak to, you know, I spoke to a practice manager who we started working with recently, and they describe themselves, I'm not a tech person. You know, and it feels a little bit like there's a ceiling, there's a cap, and there's a narrative. How do we combat that? How do we encourage people who aren't vibe coding or, you know, plugging in to the APIs, or they're not overly technical people, but how do we encourage and create that culture of improvement of digital skills to empower the whole team to step forward?
It's amazing how many times I go into a practice and technology is not in any of their forms of onboarding, which kind of blows my mind. Technology is always the sort of the afterthought, where in today's world it can't be. Whether you get on with it or you don't, it's here and it's here to stay. And you know, you won't survive as an organization if you haven't got some form of technology integrated. So I think really it's about making sure that you can integrate some form of, you know, like even if it's a basic learning management solution that can help take them through this journey of understanding the core concepts of the technology that's within practice. Sometimes if we look at the practice management system, because that's a ever evolving beast, like with all technology, right? It is making sure that you're putting through your team understanding what it is that the practice management system can do for them and trying to stay ahead. You will end up with a number of different technologies within the practice. Okay. So you've got your practice management system, you've got your email and file and your general foundational ecosystem. You've got the client interaction piece, you know, which might have some form of digital triage integrated within it. You've got your phone system. And my view is that, you know, across the board, you should be really appointing multiple owners to these different solutions so that they can try to stay ahead and on top of what these solutions can do for them. And generally, these are the people that are really interested and passionate about what these solutions can do. They can see the value behind them. So they're almost like partly invested, and they're the ones that will ultimately get the buy-in from the rest of the team to be able to take them on this journey of awareness. And I think it's about sort of making sure that you can bring these leads, these owners together and almost review the general technology for the practice almost on a quarterly basis. It's something which we do with our clients, and it's incredibly important, is trying to sort of make sure you've got that roadmap of understanding of where you're going and what's going on. With regards to sort of the general skills, you know, there's a number of things that are going on. And, you know, the one thing, you know, the elephant in the room at the moment is AI, right? You know, a lot of people fear what AI is, and they shouldn't, but it's really important that they also understand, you know, how it works, how it functions, and how to utilize it properly. Because I think, you know, there's two types of people that you're going to be tackling within the practice at the moment. There is the person that is terrified about the concept of AI and will run the opposite direction because they feel it's going to steal their job. And then you've got the other person that's so incredibly excited that they're going to be utilizing their own tools within your environment, which is a big no-no because you've got no control over that. So they could be feeding personal information into these solutions, which is then going into public domain, which is kind of not a good idea. So I think it's really trying to sort of stop, understand what solutions that you have got within the practice, understanding whether you're getting the most from those solutions through the support of internal owners, and then making sure that you've got some form of training system to be able to increase the awareness of what these solutions can do so that people can get the best of value from them. And that's all the way from onboarding, but also looking at the generalized solutions such as AI and cybersecurity as well. That's another big one with my other hat on, making sure that they have the fundamentals to be able to keep the practice safe, but also so that, again, they can get the most from the solutions in place.
So you just mentioned cybersecurity, Jack. So we've heard about, big brands and, M&S, has had a big cyber attack. But that's just the big companies. So as a small practice owner, I don't need to be worried about a cyber attack, do I?
Ah, it's so wrong. But yeah, I hear that too often. I mean, ultimately, the attitude most people have is I'm small, I'm insignificant. Why would someone want to come after me? And it's not that you're targeted because you're small. It's not that you're targeted because of what you've got, right? You're targeted because you're a low hanging fruit. You're incredibly easy to break into. The people that you're tackling or you're going up against are not, things like nation state hackers, these big groups, that sort of come in and take down, major organizations. They're not who you're going up against. You are right. What you've got generally is of no interest to a professional hacker, if you can call it that. What you're tackling against are, the spotty teenager that's playing with a tool that really doesn't understand what they're doing. They're almost kind of going out, and you can get these tools off the dark web, even not on the dark web, that will do the hacking for you. You can even, if you're really that malicious, you can even do a financial split with someone where you say, look, I'll do a 70-30 split of whatever we get back from this organization by going and deploying a form of ransomware, which ultimately goes and encrypts your data so you've got no way of getting it back. And the only way you can potentially get it back is by paying the ransom. Those are the types of solutions that are out there. But you're targeted, and you will be targeted as a small organization if you don't put the very basic forms of best practices in play. And it doesn't mean that you need to be like Fort Knox, okay? It just means that you need to sort of shut your front door, lock it, and take the sign that down from the front saying, please come in, doors open, and help yourself, right? It's putting in very basic fundamentals to prove that you're doing everything you can. And that's incredibly important, especially in today's standard where we've got things like, general data protection regulation, where we do have a requirement, not just as an organization, but even as the employees themselves have a requirement to make sure that they're doing everything they can to keep their clients and their patients' data safe. And so it is basically making sure that you get these basic forms of best practices in play so that you stop being that low-hanging fruit, which is too easy to target. And that's the only reason why you would be targeted ultimately, unless you've really upset someone.
Goodness, it is quite scary. We didn't want this session to be a complete downer or anything, but we have a cryptographer on our team, and so we're fortunate to have some really good expertise in terms of understanding cybersecurity. We've had support from through Innovate UK. We got introduced to their secure innovation program, and it's a due diligence exercise to look at your practice and what you can improve. And as I say, you don't need to be Fort Knox, but you do want to avoid something that could be avoided. So where can people start with cybersecurity then, Jack? What are maybe 2 or 3 things that every practice could do to improve their cybersecurity?
I think, in all honesty, the best thing you can do, and this doesn't solve all your problems, so please don't think it will, but I think there are very rarely situations where there are, straightforward guides on what it is that you can do. But one thing that the government has done that I think is very good is the government cyber essentials scheme. I think it's a really good idea, and one recommendation I would say to everyone is that to go to the Cyber Essentials site and download their best practice guide, which is ultimately like a checklist that you can go through of going, have I got this? Have I got this? Have I got this? You don't necessarily need to go and pay for the certification. I don't think that's absolutely necessary, but I do think it's a really good idea to at least go through and sort of understand and acknowledge all the different areas within the practice that you need to consider. One massive area that really needs to be looked into is making sure that your team are aware of, basic cyber hygiene. I think that's so fundamentally important. I don't think there are many platforms out there that I think do it particularly well. It's what's caused us to actually go and build out our own solution following the Vet Dynamics conference, which was a huge success, where we created almost a cyber escape room experience to learn the basics around cybersecurity, putting them into a scenario, into a veterinary scenario, so they can really truly understand what's involved, but really understanding if they didn't do that, what does it mean, and understanding the importance of IT policies and why we have them in place, and why it's important to have a password of a certain length, and how to do that in a manner that's going to make it easier for you to remember, and how to ensure that you have unique passwords for different platforms, and what tools are out there that potentially can help you. And I mean, that's something which we obviously specialize in, not from a sales pitch point of view, but that's what we do to go into practices. But I would very much say, make sure that you go and look at the Cyber Essentials scheme. I think it's a really, really good starting point, and make sure that you've got some form of cyber education within the practice. You should be, this is not a choice, you should be doing some form of cyber training with every single member of staff at least once a year. And there is no excuse for that, because if you don't, you will get caught out at some point.
I think you need to sell it, Jack. It's needed. Don't apologize for a sales pitch. It's important stuff. And to be honest, vet teams need someone they can trust, who knows their stuff, who knows the sector and knows the risks. So we've established that hackers are generally bad. So what is an ethical hacker, Jack? And what does one of those people do?
So, I mean, ethical hacking is basically where you always do things with permission. So I would never break into, and I never have broken into a system or an environment without the explicit consent from the person that's requested it, into their solutions. And generally it is to try to, I suppose, find things before the bad guys do. You basically follow a set of practices to ensure that you remain transparent, and, like I say, in a way that you are always doing things with explicit consent from the end user. So, for me, it would be, and I do this multiple occasions. You go into practices and basically analyze their environment to try and find potential holes and weaknesses, so that you can come back to them with a set of recommendations. And so that's kind of what I do with my side of things. That's why having the ethical hacker hat helps, because I understand all the processes and the concepts that are used, or a lot of which are used. I wouldn't know everything, because it's impossible to stay on top, but I understand all the core concepts around it, so that I can try to go and apply these within prospect and client environments, to at least pre-warn them, forewarn them of things that they need to do to keep their environment safe.
I won't ask you where you learned all this stuff. There may be some things you don't need to disclose. But you're a force for good. I'm on board, Jack.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the emotional preparation that's required for a big tech change, because technologies, of course, logical decision is required. Read the state of the PMS, look at all the options, ask for recommendations, do demos, do the logical stuff. But really, I think it's an emotional state of mind that's needed. You need to prepare yourself for the stresses and strains of moving from one system to another thing. So how do you help your clients when it comes to preparing their hearts and minds, not just what's on their desks?
So the first thing is, before people look at potentially transitioning from one solution to another, is to ask the question of, do you need to? What is the driver behind this change? Why are you opting to, maybe it is moving practice management system. Why are you wanting to make that change? And most of the time it's because of lack of functionality. It doesn't do what they need it to do. But one of the things I've really noticed as of recent is a lot of people don't ask the question to their existing provider. Bearing in mind that most vendors, they communicate about changes via email. There are some exceptions to that, but they'll go and send an email to a very busy veterinary professional's mailbox, which never gets read because they see it and they go, delete, haven't got time for that. And so they're unaware of all the things that are going on within these different solutions. And so they get to that point where they want to make this change, but they haven't considered whether the existing solution can do it. And so one of the first things I'd always ask people to do is, if there's particular functionality that you believe is missing, go out and ask your existing provider as to whether they can do that or not. And if they can't, what is the pipeline? How long is it going to take for it to be integrated? Or are there third-party solutions that could indeed be plumbed in or plugged into their existing platform to make it work, to allow to deliver on what it is that the practice wants? Now, if after that fact you're like, no, this doesn't do what I need it to do, it's really important to sort of work out who's going to help you on this journey. And one thing you want to do is you want to get your A team together, right? The key people, the key personnel that are going to help you sell this solution to the rest of the team, but that also have an interest, an invested interest in what it is that you're trying to do, or why you're looking to try to make this change, and who have a good understanding of your processes, your flows, the way that you guys work, because obviously they're going to help you map it out. Now, once you've got your A team together, it's about sort of breaking down these particular functions and really understanding what it is that you need. So you may have started this journey because you felt that there was a particular function or few functions that were missing, but what you want to try to understand is, what do you need? So what have you currently got? Because everyone always forgets that. They jump straight into, oh, this looks great because it does X, Y, and Z. But have you actually checked that it does the ABC bit that you had at the start? Because no one does. So it's, what do you need the solution to do? Look at what you've currently got, make sure it does all those things, and also find out where, what are the things that you'd like it to do. And that's where it's always good to do a review of multiple different solutions, to have awareness, right? That's another reason why take the state of the PMS, another platform that we're looking to launch, which is platforms.vet. That's going to be coming out very, very soon in January, which is a free platform to both vendors and users, which again is to increase awareness of solutions that are in the marketplace. So you want to be able to go and do a bit of reviewing out there to see what is possible, right? Even if you have no intention of moving from your current platform, you still want to know what could be done, what's available to you. But this functionality list, you build this and you split it between what are the things that you want and what are the things that you need, right? What are the non-negotiables? And what you'll do is you'll go and work with potential providers to find out where the gaps are in these solutions, and whether there are indeed platforms out there that can be plugged in that can enhance or at least deliver on the things that you need. Is then trying to understand kind of what's the impact going to be to the practice. Things like, from a commercial point of view, what equipment are you going to need? Do you have to change what you've existingly got? Going down to the point of actually properly testing the platform. You don't want to just you playing and testing the platform. You want to roll it out to a couple of your team, so this A team, to really truly understand how it functions, whether the interface is intuitive and easy to use, which is never going to be. It's a practice management system, for example. But you want to sort of work out, whether it is usable and whether it can be fit within the environment and what you believe are going to be the impacts to you. It's then sort of really trying to sort of work out what are all the costs going to be. We too often focus just on what is the implementation cost and what is the monthly user cost. Are there any other hidden fees that we need to be aware of? If you want to go and sort of, I don't know, plumb in something like VidiVet, does that cost you more money? Is there going to be an implementation fee? Because you want to be aware of that. You don't want to surprise. You then really got to try to understand how long is it going to take to make this transition. So once you've understood and you've made the decision, an informed decision of what it is that you're going to implement, how much time is it going to take from your time, from your team's time, and is that achievable? Because if they suddenly say, well, actually, this is all on you and it's going to take, several months, have you got several months to go and roll this out? And is it worth that transition? And what are they going to do to help you prepare for that, your team, for that change? Is it just that they say, here's a knowledge base, over to you, work it out yourself? You want to know that they're actually going to sort of support you in that journey and give you experience from other migrations, from other people that are going from this system to that system, that can potentially speak to you and maybe give you some inspiration of what it is that you can do. Obviously, there's the core due diligence too. So making sure, have you checked around things like security, backups, resiliency, support? What about the roadmap? Where are they going with their product? Because ultimately, you're making this transition because you feel that the solution you've currently got is not doing enough for you. You don't want to fall into that trap again. So realistically, you want to make sure that they've got a plan, and that plan is aligned with where you're looking to go. And sort of one of the, I suppose, the final biggies for me is, try and find someone. The great thing about this industry, I love the veterinary industry because it is a very social scene and it's very interactive, but it's also very small, which is a good thing, which means you guys talk and you share information, which is great because that's not common with a lot of industries. And so I would very much go and find someone, not through the vendor, go and find someone that actually uses the system and get their honest views. Find out what works really well, what doesn't work so well, so it is something that you can pack back before you make that informed choice.
That was an incredible amount of information there, Jack. That's basically the checklist for making the transition. But it's really good. It shouldn't be done just because you're "Oh, I'm really frustrated about this," or "Oh, there's one with prettier colors that's come out, and yeah, there's some really nice things. The user interface looks brilliant." But ultimately, it needs to be a workhorse. It needs to do functionally what you need it to do and change. You might be quick to adapt new technology. I certainly am. I learn new tech all the time, but then getting the rest of the team to catch up is, oh goodness, that's hard work, and you don't want to be stuck there. So in terms of things that have come into the market, we've talked about, there's a few challenges historically, things have been difficult, but there are new things that are coming into the market. What's kind of exciting you personally, Jack? What kind of tools, or I know you're not one to kind of overly advocate for one particular brand, but feel free to mention some things that you think are interesting and worth people taking a look at.
I think there's lots of exciting things within the marketplace at the moment. I think there's been a sudden drive of new solutions, and I think it's because, going back to the concept and the integration of AI, it is so easy to spin up solutions now, which means that actually, with the fact that we've removed some of the barriers around poor integrations, and now have got the fact that AI can now ultimately help us build things. I mean, I'm not sure if you've played around with things like ChatGPT's Codex. It's incredible, but the point is, you can spin up these solutions incredibly quickly. Now, the bits that sort of are exciting me slightly is I have this phrase that I love, which is automating the mundane. There is so much mundane things that happen within a practice, right? Boring administrative functions. One thing that I'm very excited about is the concept of the integration of an AI co-pilot. So this is going beyond the concept of a basic scribe. If your practice doesn't have a scribe, why? It saves you time. It saves you a huge amount of time. And if you don't see the benefit of it, you haven't really truly understood the solution yet. So I'd ask you to go and look at it again. But the next phase of that is integrating some form of co-pilot where you can ultimately interact with this digital assistant that will follow you through your journey within the practice to be able to answer any questions that you might have. It could even, to a point, there are clinical based AI solutions out there that you can use as almost like a sounding board. You can throw an idea past, but the benefit of a co-pilot is it brings all that information together, which ultimately means it needs to be integrated within your tool sets. And I've seen this outside of the veterinary space. I mean, we've got one ourselves. We have a AI agent called Puffin, which manages all aspects of my business. It's incredibly exciting. So I can ask questions and it can give me loads of information because it has access to our invoicing systems, our ticketing systems, our RMM tools, so remote monitoring and maintenance tools, which sort of monitor our client environments. It has and our knowledge base, so it has access to this and it can answer all those questions. But that is something that really does get me very, very excited. I think the other thing is the fact that we're not quite at the point where we've got the level of data accessibility that we need, but I do get quite excited about the proactive element of veterinary care. There are so many synergies between what I do as a business and what vets do as a business. We're just like 20 years ahead, which is ironic, but it's one of those things. But I'm seeing a lot of what's happened in our industry happening to the veterinary industry at the moment, and one big aspect of that is the proactive care. Bit easier for us because we're dealing with computers. The only bit that's unpredictable is the user at the end that's behind the computer. But obviously animals are very different. They're very, very unique in every single way, so there's a lot more complexities. But the integration of things like wearables does excite me because at the end of the day, if we can just capture all that data and centralize that data becomes information because you can start to identify trends. So I think they're, for me, the two massive things. It's the aspect of automation, using automation more and integrating that with AI. So this is where we're getting into the agentic world of AI. We already use AI agents, but actually having things handled from start to finish on the non-important parts. They're very important. It's wrong to say they're not important, but the non-patient client focused components, there are solutions that will do that, and they do it incredibly well. There was one very good example that was brought up by the guys at Boop, where they used a digital receptionist to deal with a euthanasia case. and it handled it so well. Like I was surprised, and I was like, I really did not expect it to be quite as empathetic as it was, but it handled it very well. But I'm not saying that's definitely the answer to everything, but I do feel actually having that digital assistant to help you through that journey and having that level of predictability is going to be a game changer for this industry.
Amazing. Well, I really look forward to interviewing Puffin next year at the Best Practice Summit. You know, we could get Puffin in to just tell us everything that's really going on in the veterinary IT world. But Jack, it's been really good to speak. I've got one more kind of challenge for you, and it's been so insightful everything you've shared. I just want you to sum up what are 2 or 3 things that vet teams need to stop doing. What are 2 or 3 things that vet teams need to start doing? Just as a closing summary.
Absolutely. I think the big thing, if there's one piece of advice that I would give to everyone, and the one thing that I would ask you to take away is to not chase tools. You need to ultimately design outcomes. That is the biggest thing. You know, we've got to understand that the concept behind technology is it's there. It should be there to remove work, not to add steps. One thing I sort of said very recently, which I think is very relevant, is that, you know, ultimately technology should be like invisible, like oxygen, right? It should be supporting life, not suffocating it. And unfortunately, at the moment, that's where we are at the moment. It's almost the latter. It is sort of suffocating business and the industry in some way, but that's just because we need to sort of change that attitude towards it. And it is about having that greater understanding. And again, it's come back to that point of, you know, don't chase those tools, really design the outcome of what it is that you want to get out. Where do you want to end up, and understand what that journey looks like? And I think that is the big thing. And ultimately to assume that, you know, change is a constant. It's not going to stop. We have to adapt. That's the whole point of a business. Doesn't matter what business you're in, you will always have change. So, you know, what you've really got to think about is making sure that you ultimately build systems that adapt to the people, not people that sort of contort around to the systems. So it's that sort of main concept would be the big thing I would stress.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jack. And for everyone who's listening and watching, if you're wanting to get your certificate of attendance for the Best Practice Summit, jump onto the LearnX platform, have a look at the reflection questions, post a comment, and we'll see you on the inside.